All right. Well, welcome to the November 2024 Lower Makefield Township Historical Commission meeting. My name is Tom Argentieri. I'm sitting in for Joe Camerata, who's the chair, who is online here. And I'll turn the meeting over to Joe.
Okay, good. We'll just wait 1 second for one of our other members to join Kathy. So we have Tom, we have Victor, Monica, Mitch, myself. Kathy's joining. Anyone else?
Dave's here.
Oh, sorry, Dave. Going to see you over there. Good. Okay, so we're missing Jeff, Jim, and Helen, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
All right. Good. Just waiting a second for Kathy to join.
There she is. All right. Okay.
Okay, good. Welcome, everyone. So I think we're ready to roll. Just real quick, go over the agenda for this evening. We're going to review and approve the October minutes. Tom and I were speaking briefly. There's not really much different from the treasurer's report from last time, so I think we'll just kind of skip that. And then Tom will give a more detailed accounting of the Ghost Walk finances and how it impacted that at our next meeting. We're going to spend a good chunk of the time on the demolition ordinance status tonight, reviewing the red line document and then the appendix that I sent out. And then we're going to spend some time going through our America 250 planning. So that'll be the chunk of the meeting, will be those two topics. I'll ask Monica just to give a real quick update on Slate Hill Cemetery and the recap of the ghost tour, and then I'll give an update for Jeff on the historic resource survey. Then at the end, I just want to kind of go through the Patterson Farm Implementation Committee, the set of recommendations that were made to the Board of Supervisors and what we've been doing since then, because it's really relevant also to the Historical Commission. So let me start by asking if anyone has any comments on the October 2024 minutes. Oh, first of all, before we get into that, was that Helen here? We need a secretary. We need a volunteer for minutes.
Yeah, y'all do it.
All right, thank you, Monica. Okay, so the review and approval for the October 2024 meeting minutes. They were distributed. Did anybody have any questions or comments on those minutes?
No comments from me. Good. So move to approve.
Tom moves to approve. Victor and Mitch both second. And
favor?
all in favor? Aye. Okay.
Aye.
So approved. Thank you. I guess we'll skip the treasury report. Let's talk about the demolition ordinance status. So we had, as a group, reviewed a draft of the ordinance and then provided feedback to the township on the ordinance. I forwarded that in the distribution in my email what our feedback was. So let's take a look real quick at the new ordinance. And I thought that I should be able to share this. Let me see here a second. Okay.
Yeah.
Now here, I want this one. I want this one here.
Okay. If you can zoom in a little on your screen, Joe, that would be helpful.
Yes, I can.
Use the sidebar. Give us as much as possible because there's people here that want to be able to see it.
Why am I having so much problem with this thing? Here we go. Get rid of this. Okay.
Yep.
Is that good?
Yep.
All right, very good. So I don't want to go through everything, but let's just go through the red lines and what was changed and why it was changed. So first was a comment, actually the comment that Helen had made. And Helen pointed out that permitting started in Lower Makefield Township in 1939. So we really don't have a good record of houses before that time or what they look like. So instead of just going houses that are over 100 years old, because that would leave houses from 24 to 39 exempt from this right now, she recommended that we say houses that were built before 1939 or are over 100 years old. So the first part before 1939 will be in effect for the next 15 years. And then beyond that, we'll just go with over 100 years old. Okay, that was the genesis for that recommendation. There was a change that was made in terms of what the building code was. It's just a type of typographical error. So the next set of changes that are here addresses our comments about what's the process. We had a question around what's the process and how is the historical commission involved. So what you're seeing here in the next set of changes, it actually begins to explain what the process is. There's a conditional use approval to grant a demolition permit. It goes to the building code officer. I won't go through the rest. You can read that. Upon the receipt of this permit, that the BCO, the building code officer, shall immediately notify the historical commission. So at the beginning of the process, when they get the demolition permit or request for demolition permit, we are then notified that it happens. Okay.
And so that means, so there's nothing about Harb in there yet. So that all happens before Harb gets involved.
Harb doesn't necessarily need to be involved in this, so we'll talk about that. But Harb's jurisdiction is over Edgewood Village, right? So this is beyond Edgewood Village. So by them notifying us, it allows us to kind of prepare for that and prepare, if you would, our defense. If we feel that the structure is absolutely must not be demolished. I mean, again, you'll see that at some point this is going to go to the Board of Supervisors. So it allows us to notify it's going to be there. So we're able to be involved in the process, and we're able to also defend the structure if we so choose at the Board of Supervisors meeting. Okay.
And just for clarity, you said when the permit is given,
That is the application for the permit, Tom. Thank you. Yeah.
And the BCO, is that Jim?
No.
Who's that?
Who is it? I don't know the person's name. But there's a role in the township that's a building code officer.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the next set of changes were we had taken out that the application shall include an evaluation by a professional of the historical architectural significance. We had said that's our responsibility to do that. I'm going to come back to that when we look at the appendix, when we talk about the process of how something gets designated as historic. So we'll come back to that at a later time. But we took it out that it's not on the property owner to do that. It's our responsibility to make the case for it being historic. The next changes here were actually the changes that were given to us by Harb. We had sent the ordinance over to Harb, and we asked them to comment specifically with regards to documentation. They said photographs aren't enough. We should have some type of architectural drawings looking at both the floor plans and the elevations. We should have photographs. We should have, a drone view so we can see what the site looked like, and then photographs of the interiors. And, for Victor and Tom and Dave and Kathy, we were over there doing this at Prickett just this past week, but it's exactly those types of things that we would expect. So Harb was able to get really specific in terms of what types of photographs that we're looking for. Okay. Let's go down a little bit more. So we took out, so the applicant shall present evidence to enable the Board of Supervisors to review the following. This first topic, the effect of the demolition, removal, or relocation of historical significance. Again, this comes back to us to do that. So this is why it's important that we're notified at the beginning of the process, because we then have to go back, and make a case for the historical significance, and not just of that property, but if it impacts the properties around it, for example, then we have to be able to point that out. So that's why that was crossed out. It's not that it's not important, it's just that it's our responsibility. They did talk about Harp. You could have Harp input here. And basically what this is saying is that the Board of Supervisors will accept input from both us or Harb. I mean, Harb might get involved if they want to, if they feel that it has specific architectural significance. But it basically says at the meeting where this case is presented, the Historical Commission will present its case for the impact, the historical significance of the property and the impact on the surroundings should it be demolished. Okay. In demolition by neglect, we brought in the fact that it's not just it's not just if the property is being neglected, but more or less if it produces a detrimental effect on the historical integrity of the building or the structure. So say, for example, there was a new deck that was added onto the side of it, right? And that deck's not historic. If that's being neglected, that's really not part of this. What we're really more interested in is any neglect that impacts the historic part of the property. So that's why that was added. This is just a legalese in terms of what happens if there's a conflict with other law around this. That was it. Are there any comments or questions? I know, Kathy, you had sent me a message about some timing things earlier today.
Yeah, I mean, I love all the changes. I'm glad that we got really specific as to responsibilities. My only concern was 14 days for us to come back with a detailed report seems rather rapid. I know it's also based under 30 days. So if we got an increase, I'm sure they would get an increase. And I don't know if there's stuff that conflicts with that.
Right.
But that was the one thing I, was a little concerned about.
And I think to put that in perspective, we should look at the appendix part and the work that we're going to do in order to get something to be, because in my view, that work is already done, right? If we have something that's on a list in historic, we have stated why it's historic, right? So this here to me is actually kind of pulling on that work, right? That was already done ahead of time.
Gotcha. So yeah, we're gonna when you get to the later plans and stuff, have to have the plans, and we're gonna do all that work.
Right. Well, yeah. Anyone else have any? Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing anything in this document about the room for public comment.
So you'll see it in the next document.
Okay.
So first of all, there is the hearing with the Board of Supervisors, right? In which case, for any conditional use permit, when it goes before the Board of Supervisors, then there's a chance for the property owner, obviously, to make the case because they're the ones presenting it. But then it's done in a Board of Supervisors meeting, so there's public comment there. But there's also, Tom, public input or comment on whether the property is historic, and I'll go through that in the next document.
Come on up to the table. You have to come to the table and tell us your name. Yeah, David. It's got to be official.
You might have to press the
mic button.
Turn on.
button. A little green light comes on.
Okay. Hi, my name's David. My name is David Friedman. I live on, I am a resident of the township.
There you go.
And I'm here in many ways because Monica's, all her great work with the cemetery really has inspired me to participate more. So I read, whatever you gave me, Monica. And, when I was reading about the demolition, it occurred to me, and I don't know if this is in the township's interest, but if these structures, ultimately get demolished, would the township want the first right of refusal to buy at a market rate whatever's being demolished? I mean, I'm thinking these great old stone facades, fireplace, whatever the architectural elements are. It's one thing to destroy them, but then it's like, I know they talked about recycling and all that stuff, but maybe the township wants to have the first right to buy those things at a market rate, of course, for historic purposes. I don't know. So that was one comment. I have more detailed ones, but I won't take up too much time. We don't even need to discuss that. I throw it out for.
Yeah, I like it, especially it's a right of first refusal. So it's not like it's requiring us to
Yeah.
do anything, but having.
Right. I mean, I don't know, is Suzanne there?
I don't think, I think you have to come to the table and tell us your first and last name. Okay, repeating, technically speaking, the township cannot compete at market rate, is what you're saying. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think all we have in here right now is make sure we can reuse or recycle the components, right? I think we were just on it.
Yeah.
There was a section
Yeah,
on there
no,
about,
there's a section note. It talks specifically about you should try to sell the property. You should try to relocate the building. There's a couple of things that happens before we get to recycling.
Mhm.
there is a section on there about if the historic structure should be dismantled and recycled to the greatest extent possible. I think it might be worth defining what we mean by recycle more, because that could be interpreted as, okay, we're going to take a lot of that to the scrapyard, and that's technically recycling.
Good point.
Do we know how to widen the camera so we can see more of the room? I'm getting a request. Do you know how to do that? But at least in our little screen, yeah, for them.
I mean, Victor, if you have specific language you would like to use, please send it over to me. I mean,
I should be able to come up with something for that.
okay. I'm looking for the language that basically says what is. So this is where the structure, it comes in here under D1A. The historic structure cannot be feasibly or reasonably reused. It could be removal or relocated, or they also talk about the possible sale of it. So there are steps that are there, and that's the whole. I mean, we definitely cannot take away someone's property rights, right? But what
Right,
we
right.
can do is recognize historic value and ask them to take additional steps to keep a historically significant property in the township. And that could be by sale, that could be by relocation. That would be two other ways. And then if it does get to the point of being demolished, then it's documented. Okay, Victor, so you're going to send me some language around recycling so that we are a little bit more clear that we mean in terms of historic materials, right?
Yep.
Okay. Any other comments then to this document? If not, I'd like to move along to the other document that I sent, which is looking at the process. Okay, so in the original ordinance, there was a whole slew of what defines something to be historic. And I think one of the issues was we wanted to separate out the designation of historic from the application for a demolition permit in order to avoid any types of biases around that. So what we had recommended was a process that was more perspective in terms of we, the historical commission, will go through a process to create a list of historic properties, and that list is what will be used to determine whether a property falls prey to this ordinance, or actually is under this ordinance or not. So the list would be in the possession of the building code officer. When a conditional approval came in for demolition, they would simply look at it and say, is the property on the list or not? If the property is on the list, then it follows the process that was outlined in the previous ordinance. If not, it follows the existing process. Okay, but we should look a little bit at what's the process for designating a property as historic. So it can start with actually three ways. It could start with us as the historical commission. It could start with the HARB as making a recommendation, or it could start with an individual property owner who says, I want my property listed as being historic. So I assume that most of it is actually going to come from us, but it doesn't rule out also that individual property owners would want to be listed on here in order to protect the property from demolition should they sell it. Okay. What we are responsible for doing then is creating the historical narrative. Now, I view this more as something that is 1 or 2 paragraphs. This is not a 10-page document that does a chain of title research or any of that. We simply don't have the resources to do that based on the number of properties. But it's just a historical narrative that basically states why we believe that the property is historic, and it outlines 4 criteria. And those 4 criteria are exactly the 4 criteria that's used for the National Register of Historic Places. So the criteria themselves are well established and accepted. They can't be challenged. But we have to make the case as to why a property meets one of those 4 criteria. Okay. Once we do that, then at a regularly scheduled meeting, we will actually build out what's called the Township Historic Building Inventory. Approve that.
Joe, before you
Yeah.
leave those 4 qualifications, chances are everything's going to fall under C,
Most things will fall under C, yes.
right? So, and you mentioned in the previous document that the Historical Commission is going to be responsible for deciding whether or not a property meets the criteria for historical property. So if we're going to have to do that, we're going to need expertise in archaeological and artistic significance. And with the exception of Helen, I don't know that we have that expertise. And if we don't, what do we do about it?
So I think, so yes, you're right. I would say that in addition to Helen, I mean, I pretty much have finalized my certificate in historic preservation. So I also have qualifications to do that. We could also, reach out and involve members of HARB on to give us feedback on properties if necessary.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's something that the commission needs to keep in the back of their mind all the time as people come on and off the commission to make sure that we have that expertise or at least access to that expertise.
I agree, Tom. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so we will basically, when we're going to initiate this or when we're going to modify it, we'll put this on our agenda. So it'll be a public meeting. If we want to have new properties that come on, it'll be there. It'll be announced publicly. Okay. We will send it over then to the Board of Supervisors for their review and for their approval. So we will have the list of properties, and we will also have the historical narrative as to why we believe that they are historic. And then the Board of Supervisors will either question our assessment, or they'll approve that. But in general, they have the final authority to approve the Township Historic Building Inventory. Okay, that's what step 4 says. Okay. Step 5 basically says we'll follow the same process to add or delete things. So if we want to, again, I think what we shouldn't hold this up till we get 200 properties assessed. We should chunk it maybe 20, 30 properties at a time, right? So that we should definitely start with the oldest ones and then get them on. Number 6 addresses the question of notification that Tom talked about before. So once the Board of Supervisors approves the properties on the Township Historic Building Inventory, then there will be a notification of the property owner that the property's been so designated and that it is subject to the demolition ordinance. That's here, okay? Number 7 basically says the property owner then could come back and challenge that. They could challenge the determination and they have a right to appeal. Okay, and then basically 7C says if they still don't like the decision by the Board of Supervisors, they can take it to the Court of Common Pleas in Bucks County. Okay, so process is there is a recommendation to add the property to the list. There's work done by the Historical Commission to justify that recommendation. When that list is compiled, it's sent to the Board of Supervisors. They have final approval for the list. The property owner is notified, and the property owner has a certain amount of time to challenge that if they so desire. Any questions? I'm sorry, I know I just got this today from the solicitors. I wanted to get it over to you, but
Yeah, we have a comment.
It's David again. So I really have a question or something to consider, not that needs to be answered right now, but if a house gets on this list, whose obligation is it when that person goes to sell that house to somebody else that the would-be buyer knows that they're buying a house that's deemed historic and has additional obligation?
Seller's obligation, David. You're right. That's why we talked about this, because the original process we put together didn't have public notification. We had a meeting about it, and we discussed exactly that point, that the seller needs to disclose that. So they need to know so they can disclose that.
So is that this whole process in number 7, us just alerting someone that
Number 6 is alerting them, actually. Number 6 is notification.
yeah, sorry. That whole process, that's to then now, once they know,
Right.
now
Right.
yeah, I think that's the question. Then is part of the notification us saying, I've never sold a house. Reminder, I'm on my first house. So I don't like, how does that
To me, there needs
happen?
to be it needs to be clearly stated somewhere that the homeowner then has an obligation when they go to sell that house. I mean, in other words, if I bought a house,
Mhm.
not being made aware that it's on, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily think to check some historical ledger or not. So a would-be buyer, needs to be informed that their house that they may buy is on this list and there are these additional obligations and, maybe they buy it, maybe they don't. But
So
When
my
you-
understanding is that when you sell a house, there's a disclosure form that you as the seller need to complete.
Right.
It has a whole bunch of things. And one of the things is, has the house been deemed to be historic? And that could mean at the local level, it could mean at the state level, it could mean at the federal level. Does it just one of the questions has the house been deemed to be historic? And you'll have to answer the question, yes.
That's on that standard disclosure form you get when you
Yes.
buy it? Oh, cool.
That's
Okay.
when you sell a house.
yeah, that's true. And if that covers it, then I guess we're good. But I know when I read that, when I bought the house that I bought, it was thinking more of the U.S. The United States has a similar kind of list. I
Right.
never thought that a particular county would have their own list. But if you say that it's covered, I don't know. If it were me, I would go. I would, go out of my way to make sure it's very clear, because otherwise you're going to have, 50 years from now or 2 years from now, you're going to have some irate new homeowners that
Right.
weren't aware that. And by the way, just as an aside, half the stuff my seller put on the disclosure list wasn't true, so I'm not sure how much you can rely on that. But
Right.
just a thought.
How would you like, because I agree, but I don't know the solution to that.
Wouldn't the real estate who's selling have some knowledge or be required to have some knowledge to inform the buyer?
I feel like I want to say yes, but I don't want to say for certain. I want to look into whether or not that actually is something that's included in the typical like disclosure form, seller's disclosure form, because I haven't heard of that previously at all. About requiring to notify that that say like, a house is located in a historic district or something like that.
Yeah, but what we can do, I mean, if that's a concern, we can just add to 6.b, we could add a fifth bullet point and says that they're notified that it is governed then by the demolition ordinance. So we can just tell them in the letter we send them that,
Question, if we have that in there though, and then people say they weren't notified, does that then exempt them from this? Could that be an argument they could make?
but we are notifying them. I don't understand.
Well, I mean, if they, they get through the process and they disagree, so they go to the, Board of Supervisors or the, whatever the next step is. And their argument is, I was actually never notified. And in this thing, it says I was supposed to be notified and therefore this is all moot because what was supposed to happen didn't happen. Wouldn't we be putting in there
Well,
something?
The township will have record of having sent them the letter, and then they
Right,
would
yeah.
use that to fight that, I mean, and then you can go on and on into court and all of that stuff. I mean, as David said, a lot of us have had issues with disclosures before. But
But that's
you
between
can
the
only
buyer
do
and
what you could
seller.
do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, so I did find out that it is a question on the seller's disclosure form that basically the question is, are you aware of any historic preservation restriction or ordinance or archaeological designation associated with the property?
Right.
So it is
they have to
included on
answer
there.
yes.
And if somebody lied or made a mistake on that, that would be, it wouldn't exempt anybody from, the restrictions. That would be more so a lawsuit between the buyer and the seller.
Exactly.
With their agents.
Exactly. Right.
yes.
Yes.
Hi, Suzanne Bundy. I'm a resident. I think you guys should, continue, but maybe you can't problem solve everything tonight. As an example, if the home is in an estate, all the realtor has to write on that form is the home is in an estate and we don't know. So I don't think that's going to be enough. But I think you should, write a note to the solicitor who's helping with this and say, we want to ensure that any potential buyer can be, put on notice of this. So it may be a deed issue, it may be something more. I'm not licensed to practice in this state, so I do not try to fix it right now, but I think that's better than getting hung up on
Good call.
all of it
Yes.
because it's very complicated.
Yeah. Thank you, Suzanne. So what I will do is I will amend or ask the solicitor to amend 6B with 2 bullet points. One saying that we should inform the current owner that it is subject to the demolition ordinance, so they understand the significance of being on that list. And then the second is that they should then, upon sale of the house, notify the buyer of the restriction.
Very good.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? And again, if you want to wait up, I can wait a day or so. So if you want to look at it tomorrow and send some other comments over, please feel free. Good. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the process, and Suzanne may have to help me out here as far as I understand, but where do we go from here? So once we provide feedback to the solicitor, the next step is to update the documents. They go to the planning commission. And then the planning commission reviews them and provides comments, or either way, just moves forward. It needs to go to our planning commission, but it also needs to go to the county planning commission. I think then simultaneous to that, and Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong here, the Board of Supervisors needs to have a public notification. I believe there needs to be 2 public notifications about this. So there's a chance for the public to review and comment on the ordinance before it goes into effect. And I guess once that's done, it's up to the Board of Supervisors then to approve. Suzanne, did I summarize that correctly?
She's coming to the mic.
Anytime that the board adopts a new ordinance, the first step, once it's made it through the different committees, et cetera, is that it's published, has to be published in the newspaper. And it has to age for at least, I think it's 14 business days before it could be voted on. So I think that's what you were articulating.
Yes, yeah. And it's just one notification, or is it more?
Just one.
Okay, all right, good. So yeah, so that's the process, how we go from here, okay? Any questions on that process? Okay, if we move on to the next topic. Actually, then maybe what I would ask for is a motion to return comments to the solicitor as we discussed. So the comments here to 6B, and then Victor's language that will add to the other document with regards to recycling. Once those are made, can I have a motion then to forward our approval of the documents with those changes to the solicitor and to the township manager?
So moved.
Did anybody second it? I can't see.
I'll second the motion.
Tom second. Any comments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
thank you. Okay, great. Nothing's done. Okay, the next topic.
Great work on this, Joe. You've done so much. Thank you so much.
No, thanks everyone for their feedback. I mean, we got some really great feedback to the initial ordinance too. It was very helpful. Okay, Monica, you sent me a presentation?
No, I don't have a presentation
I-
today.
I sent it to you, Joe. If you can pull it up, it would be great.
Oh, that's really,
Was the financials?
Yeah.
I think
yeah, for the financials. Okay, well, right now we're going to go to America 250. So Monica and I had a chance yesterday to talk a little bit about how to go forward with this topic. So Monica, can I ask you to kind of summarize that, how we should
Yep.
proceed?
Yep, get ready. We got plans and things to sign up for. Get ready, my friends. So I personally have been stuck on preparation versus execution, and I keep getting overwhelmed by the execution of these projects, who's doing it, who's paying for it, yada, yada. We're going to table that for a second because nothing we're suggesting is that insane. So based on our conversations, we have 3 front runners that we would like to start research on, because not until we have the research do we know we can actually do the projects that we want to do. The first being Slate Hill Cemetery, highlighting burials there from Revolutionary War times, not just necessarily patriots, but their family, what have you. I think that's kind of happening already naturally. We've already said we want to do more QR codes. So this is kind of an already in progress project that we can just make sure we time it out for 250. We also have the troops stationed at LMT during the 1776 crossings. That's the one that's mostly focused in our talks, has been focused on Makefield Park, doing something there. And I know there's been discussion over, do we do reenactors for a one-time event? Do we try and put up a permanent kind of exhibition, if you will? Again, we can table that specifics for a little bit, but first we need to research that and confirm that we have credible and interesting information that we can do some good interpretations on. And third being Washington's path through LMT. So making kind of educated guesses on the path that he made basically from Morrisville up to Washington's Crossing. Right, Joe? Am I saying that correctly?
Right, yeah. I would just say that we don't know for sure that he went through LMT. I mean, he could have went from Morrisville to Newtown over. So part of the first work is trying to determine, did he go through? And if he did, where did he go through LMT?
Yeah, exactly. So again, research before. We have multiple ideas with that, posting flags. I know there's been talk about bike race, what have you, and those are all great. But first we need to actually do the research and say, do we have enough to even make an educated guess of saying the township, we're pretty sure this is what happened, you know? So I would like to divide everyone up into teams. I know we love teams in the research of these 3 projects. People can be on more than one team. Everyone should be on at least one. And I'm looking at my volunteers too, because I think you guys should get involved because it's going to be super fun. So Slate Hill, who we got on Slate Hill?
Me.
All right, Ashley and Kathy. I'm gonna put Dawn obviously on there too. And
Did Dave
Victor
raise his hand? I thought I saw Dave raise his hand.
and Dave. Okay. Don't forget, we have 2 more fun ones. Macclesfield, just in general, and the troops stationed in LMT during the crossings. Any takers? Victor?
Just to be clear, you're looking for people to do research.
Research. This is just research. Just research. We're not executing on any of our ideas. It's just us finding the stories and going to libraries and researching history, which we all love because that's why we're here.
My guess is that might be a tentative Dawn. I mean, I don't want to be the person who nominates somebody who's not there, but
Okay. And then I can circle back to that Washington's Path. I mean,
So
to that one. I put Dawn on the list. We'll get it confirmation from her. Washington's Path through LMT. Who wants to jump on that?
I will.
Tom. Joe, I know you said you already started work on that. Do you want to go on that or pick a different one? Up to you.
Yeah, will help both. I was on the embankment piece, I already have some research, Victor, that I can show you how I started that. And we could talk about how to pick that up. And then Tom, yeah, you and I could, we could spend the day up at Spruance. It's a little bit harder to figure out the past piece, but we actually, Helen and I spent a day up there and we did some work in terms of which roads existed. Again, but the bigger question to me is, how do we know he actually took those roads and how could we figure that out? So, but you and I can show you at least some of the work that we've done already in that area, and then we can figure out how to go forward.
Okay. So I have you on Washington's Path. Joe, sound good?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Mitch, what do you want?
I was waiting for you to talk about somebody looking after filing for some of the grants that America 250 is offering.
Yep. That's not due till, so yes.
There are due dates. We're past the first one already, which is now. And then there's the next one come. I think it's April or May.
April. That's our plan. So once we've divvied up, the deadline on kind of our first dump for each other is going to be February. So then we have a little over a month to look at it. The application is really pretty simple. Joe and I talked about it a lot. So we need this research done to determine what we want to do.
Help with the George Washington path.
The path. Okay, cool. All right. And Helen's going to want to do Macclesfield, I'm assuming, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she had a lot of interest with the reenactors and things like that. So that'd be fine.
And we'll put Jim on there too. Krista, which one would you like? Okay. I think that's great. David, what do you want to help with? The path? Okay, I love it. Awesome. Okay, and I'll jump onto the Macclesfield because that's, I think, lacking a little bit. Okay, great. I'll put these on the notes so everyone knows what they're doing. I think I'd like kind of a lead for each one. So Tom, I'm going to make you the lead on Washington's Path, just so you can kind of report. The troops stationed, we'll make Helen the lead on that. And then Slate Hill, who wants to be the lead on that? Just reaching out to people, making sure they're doing their thing.
I can do that.
Okay, cool. It's just knowing who the team is and making sure they're involved however they want to be. Great. And so, like I said, the goal will be then to present your findings at the February meeting. Obviously, before that is fine, share with each other, talk offline, whatever, work together. But February is kind of our goal to say, okay, this is what we have. Is it enough to build something out of? And I think it should be. I think the path is the biggest question, but we can't we have to start working on the plans to execute, mostly because of the grant deadlines and stuff, Mitch. Exactly. So we need to get the research done now. Make sense? Any questions, comments?
Little aside.
Yeah.
We also had discussed, and I heard no further discussion about it, an educational component of it, where we could possibly go to the schools and talk to them about what we know, what we learned, how they can be visited, see it. I think that's something we should table until,
Yeah.
I think it's an important part of. what
Mitch,
we
can
need
you
to-
speak closer to your mic, please?
Always
Mhm.
something, huh? What I'm saying is that we should have an education component to this prior to it being fulfilled. We go to the schools or set up some sort of a educational program for the children to understand what we've discovered and what we're running and what we're doing, and have them get a little bit advanced information. And maybe they take an interest in it and do a little work, and maybe we can work with the schools to put projects together.
I love that. And I think we get back to the tons of ideas that we came up with and the actual capability of pulling them all off. So I love that. And again, I keep getting caught in execution, and I shouldn't. This doesn't need any research. I think it's a great idea. And so maybe it's a case of, once we've done the research on these three, exactly, table it till then and then talk and say, okay, where are we? What kind of support are we
That should be
getting?
part of the goal we're looking at as we're developing
Mhm.
these three components.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Monica, I'd like to add one more thing. Mitch reminded me of when we got the Community Initiative Award, we got that time capsule to bury.
Capsule.
And we should do that. I would suggest that we do that as part of the America 250 celebration. I suggest we do it in, July 4th, 2026. But the question is, what should we put into there? Now, I don't know, if we leave it for 50, 100 years, it's probably us that aren't digging it up. It's probably the more or less the people that are school age. So I think, to Mitch's point, that would be a great way to start maybe having a contest with the schools to make some recommendations of what to put into the time
idea.
capsule.
Oh, I love that.
That's a
Mhm.
great idea. Yeah. I mean, this is all in our vision as we move toward the end here.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, sorry. Also secretarying. Give me a second. All right. So that's all I have for 250. Anyone else? Thank you, everyone, for volunteering once I stared you down. Is Slate Hill next? I don't have the thing.
Slate
in
Hill
front of me.
is next. Yes, let me
Okay.
just call this up so we can see it.
Yeah. So just, this is quick financial rundown. Before we look at that, I mean, it was amazing. Well done, everyone. It was so fun. It was so successful. Everyone loved it. I'm just so tickled with the turnout. We had over 300 people. We actually got some people pretty angry at us by how full it was, which I'll take it. So huge thanks to Mitch for really managing that at the front, people coming in. I think selling the tickets in advance was really helpful in making it feel more professional and polished. But the fact that we've always done walk-ins for every year, we had a lot of people that didn't realize they needed tickets. So we made a plan to accommodate them, and we did, and it was great. But I think next year, that's one of the notes I have, is work harder in our marketing to make it clear that you need tickets. I think also that experience for most of the regular walk-ins, they learned this year. But just like last year, if you have any feedback, any comments, any notes, send it to me. I'm keeping a whole document, and that's really helpful when we start kicking off next year to go through that and make sure that we learn from anything from this year. And I'm sorry Jeff isn't here, but huge thanks to Jeff's daughter for getting us so many of those actors that really stepped it up a notch as well. I've loved all the community support and volunteers we've had in the past. It's amazing, but I feel like the actors brought it up a level for sure for everyone's experience. So our financials was great. Hilariously, we made almost exactly what we made last year, within $100. But again, this isn't really, we haven't approached this as a money-making event. Our goal is,
Programs. Paid for the
they
program.
paid, yeah, exactly. I mean,
Signs, so.
exactly. So our goal is to break even. Ultimately, we made $1,621.79. And that was from $1,080 in sponsorships, and the remainder income from tickets, donations, and concessions. Our total income was $3,451.09. Which is hilarious. That's so close to last year, but it's balanced differently. So we actually made a lot less in sponsorships this year. And I think it's because we had less of us going out. I think Jim did most of it himself. And so I think that's something to keep in mind for everyone. If we choose to do the sponsorships again, that we should divide and conquer better, because I know he worked his tail off for what we did get. And yeah, I think the concessions was fun and make a huge amount of extra money for us, but I think it kind of livened up the front of house experience, made it a little more fun for people waiting. And that's that. Any questions or comments or? All right.
Good job, Monica.
Yeah, good job.
Hey,
Yeah.
it was a team. Thank you so much. It was so fun.
A team with a very strong leader.
Yes.
And that's all I have on Ghost Tour. What else do we have on Slate Hill? Slate
Just a
Hill.
quick update on Keystone and where we are. Do you need any help with that?
Oh yeah,
With the
exactly.
process? Yeah.
With the grant, is that what you said?
Right, yep.
Yes, I do. We need to start the process of doing the triple bid thing now that the entire budget will be in next year. It's a little easier than the two different budgets we were trying to deal with. So honestly, my next step is just to talk to Jeff, because I know he learned a lot about that process, is learning a lot about that process with the, whatever the thing is he's doing. Historic survey. Yeah. So yeah, just get that started. I mean, the earliest the work can start is in the spring. The actual work will take the masons for the one group that I've spoken to so far. The actual work is going to take like 2 weeks. It's not a ton of work for them. And we just need to wait till the ground's thawed. So we have time, but we'll need to do the process with the township of, I'm going to say it wrong. I don't remember what exactly it is, but with, advertising and posting and all that certain amount of time. And I'll work with Jeff to confirm that.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff had put together an RFP that we had sent out, so we can use that as a template. And then just make sure that we're making sure we're checking with Jim Majewski with regards to the process. But Jim worked with us on the process for the historic resource piece, so we should.
Yeah, exactly. And I met with Jim.
Yeah.
He gave me enough information to totally confuse me, which was great.
That's
So
why
now
I
want to work with Jeff and then present something to Jim so he can say what's wrong with it so far, but it's moving.
Okay. You had said once before that we were delaying the start of it because we had to complete some mapping. Am I correct?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
You had wanted to delay the start of the project until we had a chance to complete some mapping, I think you had told me.
Yes, I still really want before the spring to get a survey of the segregated side.
Okay.
Thank you for
And
the
what is
reminder.
required in order to do that?
Time and Victor.
Yeah, Jim was supposed to get back to me on some ideas on how we're gonna go about actually like mapping it. I haven't heard back from him yet, so I might have to reach out to him again and just to remind him.
So by the mapping, I assume that you mean kind of like on the other side where you actually have a map of where the graves are and who's buried there, correct?
Exactly. Just basically a more modern version. I mean, we have the 1926 map of the original two sections that works. That, we've been updating information, but that works. We don't really need to redo that. But we have nothing, no visual, no map of any sort of any record of the segregated side. So we need to create that. There's not that many, remaining stones. So it's not going to be a ton of work once we kick it off. But I think Victor, one of the reasons I love him is he wants to do it right instead of I just want to walk around and write some things down, and that's not right. So Victor's trying to do it correctly.
Like the most efficient way of actually generating like a map that's accurate with measurements and that sort of thing. I mean, like anybody could go out there with a laser measure and do it, but that can be tricky sometimes. So I was trying to talk to Jim about if there's any sort of like survey equipment we could rent and use for something like that, whether you're using GPS or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Good. All right. Let me know if you need any help. Any questions on that? Any questions on Slate Hill? Good. Thank you, Monica. I'd like to move on then talk about the Patterson Farm Implementation Committee. So this group is actually an extension of something which was called the Ad Hoc Committee. And my God, I think it was 3 years ago now, maybe 4, but I think it was 3 years ago where the Board of Supervisors put together a group called the Ad Hoc Property Committee. And the purpose of that group was to look at and help the Board of Supervisors decide what to do with township-owned properties. And especially those properties which may have been, or which are, I should say, historic in nature. So when the first year, the committee started looking at a number of properties, and they did some work around Patterson Farm, and they also did some work around the Slack House up on Makefield Highlands Golf Course. As they moved from their first year to the second year, the board asked them to focus just on creating a master plan for Patterson Farm. And that work was actually completed last year. There was money allocated to hire an architect who helped to develop that master plan. It had public, 3 public input sessions to the plan. The plan was developed, it was presented, and it was approved by the Board of Supervisors, and it's actually online. You can go online, you can read the whole document. Moving into this year, the ad hoc committee was kind of put on hold in favor of a committee that would look at the implementation of that master plan. And serving on that committee is myself as the representative from the Historical Commission. Dennis Stedman actually chairs it. Ron Schmid is on there, Fred Childs, Jennifer Stark as the representative from HARB, and Peter Soler, who is on the either on the zoning board or the planning commission. I forget which one. He is also on there. So I wanted to show you what we've been doing. And we had a set of recommendations that we presented to the supervisors in September. So I'd like to show you those recommendations and then update you on what we've done since those recommendations. So let me figure out how to share the screen. Why do I have such problems with knowing how to share a screen on Zoom?
So make sure the document you want to share is up first
Yes, I have it.
on your computer, and then right in the bottom, see right where I'm pointing here?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm back on that screen. Okay. Yep, share screen. And it's this document here. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yep.
Okay. So this first paragraph basically says what I just told you. The master plan actually prioritized a set of what they called stage 1 activities that should be done in years 1 to year 3, and then there's a set of stage 2 activities. As you can see through these 8 activities that are listed here, many of them are really meant to just secure the structures, to make sure that there's no further deterioration and no further harm to the historic integrity of the structures. You see things about water abatement, painting, environmental cleanup, and things like that. There's also work that was done, or part of those 8 steps was also tasked the group to look at how do we go forward with the management of the property? Could we recruit a nonprofit to come in and manage the property on behalf of the township? What government grants would be available to help to do that? And then, of course, for our perspective, we are responsible for preparing a submission to the National Register of Historic Places. So these were the 8 things that were identified in stage 1 of the master plan. And this was the charter that was given to the Patterson Farm Implementation Committee. So we formed 3 subcommittees around this. You can see the National Register one, there was one on building protections and enhancement, and then there's a group that was working on nonprofit and funding. So the group had put out a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on 9/24. Ron and I had the opportunity to present this at one of the meetings in October. And here's what the recommendations were. So our first recommendation was that the board authorized the formation of a nonprofit entity for the improvement and property management of the Thomas Janney Homestead Historical Architectural District. That name, Patterson Farm, is not a historical name. And Helen and I have been discussing this, and Helen had the recommendation that we go back to recognizing its significance and the significance of Thomas Janney. That's why you're seeing that name being used here. But we were unable to get a nonprofit. Every nonprofit we talked to said, this is way too big. You're talking about 2 farmsteads, 15 buildings over 2 farmsteads. We can never manage something like that. So the recommendation back to the Board of Supervisors was that they form a nonprofit to do the property management and historic preservation of that. And here's the rationale. I'm not going to go through that here. Okay. Then the second recommendation was that they should enter into preliminary lease discussions with Patterson Farm Preservation. So there is a group, Patterson Farm Preservation. Some of you may know Donna Doan and Jeff Herco. Both have been very involved in the process. Both are very passionate about preserving, especially the Satterthwaite farmstead there, and approached us with a plan for how to get started with doing that. So the recommendation was to start lease discussions with Patterson Farm Preservation on Satterthwaite. And then, of course, on the other farmstead, which is called the Janney Farmstead now, that is where the Artists of the Art of the AOY, they're in the house and they hope to expand their presence to other buildings there. And there was a similar discussion around the lease agreements, starting lease agreements for those. Okay. In addition to that, what we have under Peter's leadership, the other group conducted a condition assessment of the buildings and worked with the township on getting a painter to make a proposal for the painting of the buildings. Now, there's some issues there with regards to how to handle lead paint containment. There's also a lot of issues with how to handle the historic materials. So Peter and that group reviewed that, they made comments. And then we as a total group, as a total committee, we prioritized which buildings should be painted first. There's a budget for that, and that budget was actually given to the township, given to David to include into the township budget for 2025. Okay, so that was another piece of work that we had done around both preserving and restoring the property. So since that occurred, we actually have made progress on the nonprofit. So Dennis, Ron, and I had a chance to meet with a group called Harbor Compliance that is going to take the lead in forming the nonprofit for Patterson Farm and also submit that nonprofit as a 501c3 to the IRS, so we're able to accept tax-deductible donations. So we anticipate that that nonprofit will be up and running within, say, 4 to 6 months. It's a matter of completing the paperwork. Probably the longest thing is waiting to get response back from the IRS around the 501c3. But once the nonprofit's formed, we can always accept the donations, because once we get 501c3 status, it actually retrogrades back to the date the nonprofit's formed. So that's not an issue. The other thing that we have done is, again, started to draft what that management agreement would look like between the township and the nonprofit. PHMC, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, they own a number of properties across the state. And over the past, say, 5 or 10 years, because of budget reasons, they found that they've had to withdraw their personnel. So they've been actively trying to bring nonprofits into managing those sites. So Janice Mullen is the person from PHMC who's responsible for that. She gave us a lot of great advice on what to look for in nonprofits or how to establish a nonprofit for this. But more importantly, she gave us a lot of great legal documents in terms of how the state has gone about, creating these management agreements with nonprofits. So we have those documents. We have sent them to the township solicitor. Dennis and I met yesterday with David and the township solicitor in order to start drafting what that agreement looks like. So as we move into next year, we should have the nonprofit formed. We should have submitted for a 501c3 status. And we should be having a first draft of that lease agreement, because that'll be a negotiation, if you would, between the nonprofit and the township. It has to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. But once they have approved that and they send the lease, they allow the nonprofit to manage, then the nonprofit will enter into discussions with both AOY and PFP, Patterson Farm Preservations, on, bringing them onto that. So that's a lot of information. Let me stop there and see if people have any questions.
No,
No?
it's cool to hear.
Yeah.
You guys been doing a lot of work. Thanks, Joe.
So I think it's really a major step forward. One of the things that we're also looking at right now, one of our first goals, once we have the lease agreement signed, is to do a capital campaign, because we need to raise money. I mean, the township has budgeted some money to help with the restoration, but there's no way that they could budget enough money to restore all of those buildings. So we need to look at grants. We have actually identified some grants, and working with the township, we're applying for one actually next week already. And we are then going to run a private capital campaign to raise funds for future restoration of those buildings. So I think that'll be the major things that we'll be focused on in 2025, getting the lease done, getting the capital campaign. Once we have that going, then we can actually start doing some work there. So hopefully people will see some improvements already to the farm starting next year with the paving and things like that, and then a whole slew more improvements as we move into 2026.
Awesome.
Very good, Joe.
But it is really important that we get this National Register submission done. So let me take maybe just another minute to say that. Helen and I have been working on this. We've been working on it with a volunteer, a person named Wendy Grant. Wendy and I attended Bucks County Community College, the certificate program, historic preservation. That's how I met her. So we have kind of a initial draft. It's not quite where it needs to be, especially with regards to how we make the case for the agricultural historical significance. There's more work that I need to do on that. Tom has done some great work already in providing some data. And then when we actually reviewed the documents that were done for Prickett this past week, we got some more, we got a good case study, let's say, of how they actually made the case for the Prickett farm and its agricultural significance. And I think we'll be able to use that. But it's definitely something that I need to devote more of my time to in terms of getting that submission done and getting it submitted in the first quarter of next year.
Yeah, as I had mentioned, Joe, there's more research that I can do on that, but I was holding off until we all sort of came to an agreement as to what it was we were actually looking for.
Yeah.
So if you get a chance to look at what I had sent you and you think I'm on the right path, just let me know and I'll keep going.
So I think you are in the right path. And so what Tom has, there are some agricultural census. There's about, I think, Tom, a half dozen of them that were done. There's ones that date back from the late 1700s. There's a couple in the 1800s. I think there's one in the early 20th century. And what Tom had looked at was, what was the output of Patterson Farm in relationship to all the townships in Lower Makefield? I'm sorry, all the farms that were in Lower Makefield at that time, right? Which basically should help to determine its significance, if it's above average, or if it's specialized in one area. But at the same time, you got to build a story around that, right? Data is the data, right? And what Helen's been trying to do is craft the story around it. And the story that Helen wants to craft is that Patterson Farm remained true to being a generalized crop producing farm, where as most of the farms in the township moved into the 19th century, especially the latter half of the 19th century, they specialized. They maybe had orchards, they maybe had cows, they had one or the other, but they didn't stay, if you would, kind of, for lack of a better word, a soup to nuts, a full-fledged farm. And Helen is making the case that Patterson Farm never changed. It always produced an array of crops. It has some livestock. It did have some orchards there too, but that's the kind of case that she's building, and that differentiates Patterson Farm from the other farms in the township. So Tom, I guess that's what I was trying to say, is that we might need to be a little more nuanced in terms of how we're looking at the data, but I think that the work that you've done is a great starting point of us just understanding what did Patterson Farm produce for in those census, just pulling that information out so we know what was on the farm and just being able to compare that to the township as a whole, it helps us to either say that Helen's story is correct or it's not correct, and we better find a different story. So if you would do that for the other censuses, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I think we had agreed on 3 or 4 owners of Patterson Farm over the
Right.
years that we were going to be looking at. And so I only did the data for the first owner that was on the list
Right.
in that time period. So I'll go back and start on the other 3.
Yeah. That was one of the initial things that Helen and I did. Patterson Farm was owned by Patterson all these years, and it wasn't owned by Janney either. So there's a whole bunch of owners in between. And Helen and I created a chain of title research for because there's 2 farmsteads, right? They were one, then they got divided into 2, and then back in 50, they got reunited again. And we created a whole chain of title in terms of who owned the property when. And that is the information that Tom needs. So for example, in the 1870 census, he needs to know, well, who owned those farms in 1870? What names am I looking for? The challenge is, and Tom will tell you, is that, in 1870, they weren't typing these things onto a computer. So most of those records are handwritten, and yeah, good luck sometimes with trying to read historical handwriting. So that's always a fun challenge. If anybody has a special talent for that, I'm sure Tom would appreciate your help.
Yeah, Helen's the best I've found. Helen, the one I know that can do it.
Yeah, Helen is very good at it. Okay, any further questions on Patterson Farm or on the implementation committee? No? And I think that brings, one of the other topic was, the Historic Resources Survey. This has been a lot more challenging than I thought. We got the grant for $25,000. We put out an RFP and we got absolutely no response to the RFP. I think we put a lot of stuff into the RFP and we scared some people off by the amount of work, because we tried to get properties to like 1939 and there's just hundreds of properties. So Jeff and I went back and we kind of scaled it down a little bit about what we expected from the consultant. Like when we wrote the RFP, we had them creating all types of presentations to the board of supervisors, and all, well, we don't need to do that. We can do that, right? What we really need them to do is surveying the properties and entering the information in the PA share. So Jeff and I went back and we kind of narrowed down the scope of that. And he has at least one person, one agency that's come back and expressed an interest. And he's working with them right now and trying to see if they can come to agreement on a scope of a project and a price. So hopefully by our December meeting, he'll have some positive news for us on that.
Awesome.
Very good.
Is there any further public comment?
No more public comment?
Okay. Our next meeting is actually on December 13th. And I had 2 things that I'd like to have on the agenda. First of all, we should start to plan our 225 goals and objectives. And I'll forward the goals and objectives for this year so we can review them where we made progress. We made a lot of progress. There's no doubt about it. Things like the National Register submission are taking longer than we thought, so we need to double down on those. But we should set our goals and objectives for next year. And then we should at least start to have a discussion around the officers. We don't need to decide this at the meeting, but we should have a list of candidates because as we move into our January meeting, we need to elect the officers for the commission. So they are 2 of the topics I have. I'm sure there's a number of other things that are on here. The demolition ordinance, 250 planning, we'll also do those at the December meeting too, okay?
Put the cataloging back on for next time too, so we can maybe start on that, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, yeah. And just a real quick update, I know some of you were involved. There was a bunch of photographs, boxes and boxes of photographs from the Yardley Historical Association that was given to us. And Monica and I spent about an hour and a half yesterday at the Township building, and we saw some beautiful photographs of people we don't even know, right? And they're not even labeled. We went through, it's like over half a dozen boxes, I think. We just were interested in buildings, so any photographs of buildings and things we pulled out and put aside. I don't know what Jim Majewski's going to do with all those other photographs of people, but
Yep, for
anyway,
the record, we told him to get rid of them.
yes, for the record, we
They're
said,
still there.
Yeah, but
It's
In the
probably a
background.
good thing I didn't come because I would have been pulling out all the people somehow and trying to track them down. So maybe it's
You
best
can work
I'm
on that with
injured and
Jim.
not
there
moving.
you go, Kathy. You and Jim could figure that out. I told Jim that he probably could create a decade's worth of posts for Facebook posts on, do you know these people? So right. But anyways, we did that. So yeah, so we'll come back to the cataloging topic also next time. Okay. Anything else for this evening?
Huge thanks to the volunteers that came. Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank
And
you.
they'll
Everyone.
come next-
Thank you
next
for your
time.
comment. David, thank you for your feedback on the demolition ordinance. Much appreciated. Please stay involved as we go through. We'll need your support. And, I hope you're able to help us out and join us. Thank you everyone for attending tonight. I will accept the motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Thanks, everyone. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Have a great night. Take care.
Who
Bye.
seconded that?
You too.
You?
Thank you.
Bye, guys.